MY mother mocked MY small online shop in front of 50 high society GUESDS. SHE laughed. She MAKES pennies from her bedroom. A billionaire investment CEO stood up. He walked over, shook MY hand, and ANNOUNCED. We just acquired her company for $75 million. My mother stood in front of 50 of the wealthiest people in Richmond, Virginia, held up her champagne glass, and laughed at me. She said I make pennies from my bedroom, running some little online shop nobody with any real taste would ever bother buying from. The room laughed along with her, the polite kind of laugh rich people give when they want to stay on the host's good side. I stood there in a dress I bought on sale, holding a glass of water instead of champagne, and I let her finish. I let every single guest get one more chuckle out of my mother's favorite joke, the joke she'd been telling for 2 years about her failure of a daughter selling candles online instead of marrying well or landing a real career. What my mother had zero idea about, standing there enjoying her moment in front of her fancy friends, was that a man sitting 3 tables away had spent the last 6 weeks negotiating to buy my company for $75 million. He put down his fork. He stood up in front of that entire room, and he walked straight toward me while my mother's smile started sliding right off her face. Grab a drink, get comfortable, and hit that subscribe button right now, because you need to see exactly what happened when he opened his mouth in front of everyone. My name is Sophie Calder, and I am 28 years old. My father passed away when I turned 9. A sudden accident on a highway outside Richmond that took him from my mother and me in a single terrible afternoon. He worked as a high school chemistry teacher, and he taught me 2 things before he left this world that shaped everything I became. He taught me how molecules combine to create something new, and he taught me that real value never comes from what people think of you, only from what you actually build. My mother, Cynthia, grieved my father for exactly 2 years before she remarried. His name was Robert Ashcombe, a wealthy commercial real estate developer 20 years older than her with a house in the West End of Richmond that looked like something out of a magazine. My mother changed the moment she married Robert. She traded her modest teacher-adjacent life for country club memberships, charity gala committees, and a specific kind of social climbing that consumed every part of who she used to be. I never fit into that new world she built for herself. I remember standing at my first country club dinner at 11 years old, wearing a dress my mother picked out, feeling like a stranger in my own family. The other kids there talked about ski trips to Colorado and summer homes on the coast. I talked about the candle I made in my bedroom that weekend using leftover wax from my father's old chemistry set. My mother pulled me aside that night and told me, quietly but firmly, that talking about homemade candles at a country club dinner made her look bad in front of people who mattered. I asked her who exactly mattered more than me, and she gave me a look that answered the question without a single word. School became my escape from all of that. I attended a decent public high school in Richmond rather than the private academy my stepfather offered to pay for, a choice my mother never fully forgave me for making. I spent my free time in the chemistry lab, the same room my father once taught in years earlier at a different school across town, mixing scents and oils and testing formulas for candles and soaps that I sold to classmates for a few dollars each. My best friend through those years, a girl named Priya Desai, understood me better than my own mother ever managed to. Priya's family ran a small pharmacy near our neighborhood, and she got exactly why I found more comfort measuring wax temperatures than discussing country club gossip. We spent countless afternoons in my bedroom, testing new candle scents, laughing at how ridiculous some of my mother's society friends sounded when we overheard their conversations at family events. By the time I graduated high school, I had already sold candles to nearly 100 customers around Richmond, all word of mouth, all built from nothing but my father's chemistry set and my own stubborn determination. My mother called it a phase. She told relatives at Thanksgiving that I would grow out of playing with wax once I found a real direction in life. I attended a state university 2 hours from home, studying chemistry, because it felt like the closest connection I had left to my father. My mother wanted me to study something she considered more respectable, business or communications, something she could brag about at her charity events. I stuck with chemistry anyway, understanding by then that her approval came with conditions I refused to keep meeting. College gave me my first real taste of building something serious. I kept selling candles online through a small platform, slowly building a customer base beyond just my hometown, learning everything about formulation, packaging, and customer service through trial and plenty of costly error. My mother visited campus exactly twice in 4 years, both times finding a reason to mention, in front of my roommates, how she hoped I would eventually find something more stable than my little candle hobby. I graduated with a chemistry degree and a business that made barely enough money to cover my own rent. My mother threw a graduation dinner that year at a fancy restaurant downtown, inviting several of her society friends, and she spent the entire evening talking about her friend's daughter, who just landed a position at a prestigious law firm in Washington. She never once mentioned my graduation, or my growing business, or anything I had actually accomplished on my own. I drove home that night alone, gripping the steering wheel the same way I imagine my father once gripped his on that terrible highway years earlier, understanding clearly for the first time exactly how far my mother's love came with strings attached. If you already feel that tightness in your chest reading this, imagine growing up inside it every single day. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had a parent make you feel small for building something real, and make sure you hit subscribe, because everything changes starting in the next section. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Richmond after graduation, working part-time at a local pharmacy to cover rent while building my candle business every single night after my shift ended. I renamed the company Calder Botanicals, choosing my father's last name deliberately, a quiet tribute nobody in my family ever noticed or asked about. The first 2 years nearly broke me completely. I burned through my modest savings testing formulas that failed, packaging orders wrong, shipping products that arrived melted because I hadn't yet learned how summer heat destroyed unprotected wax during transit. I worked from 6 in the evening until 2 or 3 in the morning most nights, mixing scents at my kitchen counter, photographing products with a cheap camera propped on a stack of books, answering customer emails from my phone during pharmacy breaks. I dated a man named Trevor Holbrook during that stretch, someone I met through mutual friends who worked in finance downtown. Trevor seemed supportive at first, complimenting my drive, telling me he admired entrepreneurs. But as months passed, his comments shifted into something sharper, always disguised as jokes among his finance friends about my little candle hobby, always laughing along whenever someone asked what I did for real work. I remember one dinner specifically, sitting at a table with Trevor's coworkers when someone asked about my business. Trevor answered for me before I could speak, saying, "Sophie sells candles online, nothing serious, just something to keep her busy until she figures out her actual career." I sat there feeling exactly the way I felt at every country club dinner throughout my childhood, invisible in my own conversation, my real work reduced to a hobby by someone who claimed to care about me. I ended things with Trevor 3 weeks later, after discovering he'd been messaging a coworker behind my back, someone he described in those messages as understanding real ambition better than I ever could. That heartbreak, combined with years of my mother's dismissiveness, taught me something crucial about which relationships deserved space in my life going forward. My business partner during those early years, a woman named Danielle Ruiz who handled my social media accounts part-time, decided 2 years in that she preferred steady employment over the uncertain grind of a small startup. She left abruptly, taking with her several supplier contacts and a chunk of my customer email list, starting her own competing candle business within months of walking away from mine. I discovered her betrayal the hard way, watching my sales drop suddenly as customers received marketing emails from a suspiciously similar company using scent combinations I had personally developed. I confronted her over the phone, and she told me plainly that business relationships meant nothing personal, that she simply saw an opportunity and took it before I could stop her. I cried that entire night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment surrounded by candle inventory, wondering if my father's old chemistry lessons and my own stubborn effort would ever amount to anything real. I called my mother that same evening, desperate for some kind of comfort during my lowest moment. She listened for exactly 2 minutes before telling me this was exactly why she always encouraged me to pursue something more stable. She said, "Sophie, maybe this is a sign you should finally consider a real career path." I hung up the phone that night and made a decision. I decided I would build something so undeniable that nobody, not my mother, not Trevor, not Danielle, could ever again call it small. If you've ever had someone betray your trust while chasing your own success, drop a comment right now, because the next section shows exactly how everything started turning around, and you don't want to miss it. Everything changed for Calder Botanicals during a single unpredictable week 18 months later. I had spent that entire year rebuilding after Danielle's betrayal, developing a signature scent line inspired by my father's old chemistry notebooks, combinations of botanical extracts that smelled unlike anything else available in the crowded candle market. I named the collection Ashcombe Grove, a small private joke referencing my stepfather's last name and the wooded property behind our family home, where I spent childhood afternoons collecting herbs and flowers for early experiments. A popular home decor influencer discovered my products through a small gift she received from a mutual friend, posting an unplanned video review that reached nearly 3 million views within a single week. Orders flooded in faster than I could physically fulfill them alone. I hired my first 2 employees that same month, converting my studio apartment into a genuine small operation, working 16-hour days just to keep pace with sudden demand. Within a year, Calder Botanicals expanded into skincare products using the same botanical formulation expertise, launching a small line of body oils and lotions that performed even better than my original candles. Revenue crossed $1 million within 18 months of that initial viral moment, a number I barely believed myself when my accountant confirmed it during a quarterly review. I moved into a proper commercial space just outside Richmond, hired a full production team, and built genuine wholesale relationships with boutique retailers across several states. My mother knew almost nothing about any of this. I stopped sharing business updates with her years earlier, tired of watching genuine excitement get met with dismissive comments about finding a real career. During my company's second year of serious growth, I received an unexpected email from an associate at Cross Capital Group, a well-known private investment firm based in New York with a reputation for acquiring promising consumer brands before they became household names. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership, possibly leading toward acquisition, impressed by our growth trajectory and brand loyalty, numbers their research team had been tracking quietly for months. I flew to New York for that first meeting, sitting across from a team of sharp, serious professionals who asked detailed questions about my supply chain, my customer retention rates, and my long-term vision for the brand. Their lead partner, a man named Julian Cross, personally joined that meeting despite his reputation for rarely attending initial conversations directly. Julian Cross built Cross Capital Group from nothing over 15 years, growing it into a firm managing several $1 billion in assets, personally worth well over $2 billion according to various business publications. He asked me pointed questions about my father's chemistry background, clearly having researched my company's origin story thoroughly before our meeting even began. He said, near the end of that first conversation, "Sophie, I've watched a lot of founders build things quickly using flashy marketing and thin substance underneath. Your company feels different. Everything here traces back to genuine formulation expertise and real customer trust. That's rare, and it's exactly what we look for." Negotiations continued quietly over the following 6 weeks. Protected by strict confidentiality agreements that prevented me from discussing details with anyone outside my immediate legal and financial advisors. I couldn't tell my mother, my few remaining friends, or anyone in my social circle exactly what was unfolding behind closed doors, watching my company's valuation climb through serious, careful negotiation toward numbers I once considered impossible. We landed on a final structure valuing Calder Botanicals at $75 million, an acquisition that would let me retain creative control over product development while gaining access to Cross Capital Group's massive distribution network and resources. The deal remained unsigned, but essentially finalized during that same week my mother called, insisting I attend her upcoming anniversary celebration honoring 10 years of marriage to Robert Ashcombe. I nearly declined that invitation entirely, exhausted from months of secret negotiations and years of accumulated resentment toward every dismissive comment she'd ever made. Something inside me decided to attend anyway, curious perhaps whether anything about her attitude toward my life had shifted even slightly over recent years. I had absolutely no idea, driving toward that party, that Julian Cross himself would be sitting inside that very room. If you're already guessing what happens next, drop a comment with your prediction and make sure you've subscribed, because the confrontation in the next section is the moment this entire story has been building toward. The anniversary party took place at an elegant country club just outside Richmond, the exact kind of venue that defined my mother's entire adult identity since marrying Robert Ashcombe. 50 guests filled the ballroom, dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns, sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers while a small orchestra played softly in the background. I arrived wearing a simple navy dress I already owned, feeling immediately out of place surrounded by guests discussing recent yacht trips and stock portfolios. My mother greeted me with a quick, distracted hug, immediately pulled away by another guest before we exchanged more than a few words. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the room, watching my mother work the crowd with practiced charm, laughing at every joke, complimenting every outfit, thriving inside the exact social world she had chosen over genuine connection with her own daughter years earlier. Dinner began around 8 o'clock, guests seated at elegant round tables scattered throughout the ballroom. I sat near my mother's table, close enough to hear conversations drifting across the room, watching Robert Ashcombe discuss business ventures with several men I didn't recognize, one of whom I would soon learn was Julian Cross himself, seated quietly near the back of the room as Robert's personal business guest that evening. Midway through dinner, one of my mother's closest friends, a woman named Patricia Whitlock, turned toward me and asked with genuine curiosity what exactly I did for work these days. Before I could answer, my mother laughed loudly, cutting across the table with her champagne glass raised slightly. She said, "Oh, Sophie makes candles. She sells them online from her bedroom, if you can believe that. Makes pennies, really, but it keeps her busy." The table laughed politely. Patricia smiled awkwardly, clearly sensing tension beneath my mother's joke, but choosing to move past it quickly. I felt my face flush with a familiar mixture of embarrassment and exhaustion, the exact feeling I'd experienced my entire childhood at every single family gathering. My mother continued, apparently enjoying the moment. "Honestly, I keep telling her, at some point she needs to find something more serious. But you know how young people are these days. Everyone thinks they're going to be some big entrepreneur." Several more guests chuckled along, and I sat there gripping my water glass, deciding whether to correct her publicly or simply endure this moment the way I'd endured hundreds of similar ones throughout my life. That's when I heard a chair scrape back from a nearby table. I looked up and saw a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit standing calmly, setting his napkin down beside his plate with deliberate precision. I recognized him instantly. Julian Cross. He walked directly toward our table, the entire room gradually noticing his movement, conversations quieting one by one as he crossed the ballroom floor. My mother's laughter faded slightly, confusion crossing her face as this clearly important stranger approached her table with obvious purpose. He stopped directly in front of me, extending his hand with a warm, genuine smile. He said, "Sophie, it's wonderful to see you outside our usual conference room settings." I stood, shaking his hand, feeling every single eye in that ballroom suddenly fixed directly on our exchange. If your heart is racing right now the way mine was in that exact moment, drop a comment letting me know, and make absolutely sure you've hit subscribe, because what Julian said next changed absolutely everything in that room. Julian Cross turned slightly toward the table, addressing my mother directly with the same calm, confident tone he used throughout our entire negotiation process. He said, I couldn't help but overhear your comment about Sophie's business, Mrs. Ashcombe. I think there might be some information you're missing. My mother's smile faltered slightly. She said, I'm sorry, have we met? Julian said, Julian Cross, Cross Capital Group. Your husband Robert kindly invited me tonight as his guest, though I had no idea I'd have the pleasure of running into my newest business partner in the process. The entire table fell silent. My mother's eyes shifted toward me, confusion clearly building across her face. Julian continued, raising his voice slightly, enough that nearby tables clearly heard every word. He said, Cross Capital Group finalized an acquisition agreement with Sophie's company, Calder Botanicals, just this week. We're acquiring her business for $75 million, effective immediately upon final signatures next Monday. The room went completely silent. I watched my mother's champagne glass tremble slightly in her hand, her mouth opening without any words emerging for several long seconds. Patricia Whitlock, sitting directly beside my mother, said, $75 million. Julian said, That's correct. Sophie built one of the most impressive consumer brands I've encountered in 15 years running this firm. Her formulation expertise, honestly, rivals teams I've seen with significantly more resources and funding behind them. My mother stammered, attempting to recover some composure. She said, I had no idea. Sophie never mentioned any of this to me. I said calmly, feeling something inside me finally settle after years of accumulated exhaustion. I couldn't mention it. Mom, confidentiality agreements during negotiations. But even if I could have shared it earlier, I'm honestly not sure you would have listened. The entire table sat frozen, watching this exchange unfold with obvious discomfort. Robert Ashcombe, sitting nearby, looked between his wife and Julian with an expression somewhere between confusion and quiet amusement. Julian turned back toward me, his tone softening slightly. He said, Sophie, I apologize for interrupting your family gathering like this, but I couldn't sit quietly while I heard your work described inaccurately. What you built deserves genuine recognition, not dismissal. I thanked him sincerely, my voice steadier than I expected given everything happening around me. Several guests at nearby tables began quietly discussing what they'd just witnessed, phones subtly appearing as people started researching Calder Botanicals right there at their dinner tables. My mother remained quiet for several minutes after Julian returned to his own table, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Eventually, she turned toward me, her voice noticeably smaller than it had been all evening. She said, Sophie, why didn't you tell me any of this was happening? I said, because every single time I tried sharing something about my business over the past several years, you found a way to make me feel small about it. I stopped trying eventually. It felt easier than getting hurt again and again. She sat quietly for a long moment, something genuine finally crossing her expression, something I hadn't seen from her in longer than I could remember. She said, I think I owe you an apology and probably a much longer conversation than we can have right here tonight. I agreed, though I made no promises about exactly where that conversation might eventually lead. The rest of that evening unfolded strangely, guests approaching me throughout the remaining hours, suddenly deeply curious about my business, asking questions they never bothered asking during years of my mother's dismissive comments. I answered politely, though something inside me recognized clearly how quickly respect arrived once attached to a large enough number. I drove home that night thinking about my father, wondering what he would have said watching everything unfold inside that ballroom. I think he would have told me the same thing he always taught me standing beside his old chemistry set, that real value comes from what you actually build, never from what people choose to believe about you before they understand the whole truth. My mother and I spoke honestly several weeks later, a long, uncomfortable conversation neither of us fully enjoyed, but both of us genuinely needed. She admitted, finally, that marrying into wealth changed something inside her she never fully examined, a specific fear of appearing anything less than perfectly successful in front of people whose opinions mattered far more to her than they should have. I told her honestly that rebuilding trust would take considerably longer than one single conversation, though I remained open to trying. Calder Botanicals completed its acquisition with Cross Capital Group exactly as planned, and I remained deeply involved in product development, watching my father's old chemistry lessons reach customers across the entire country through resources I once only dreamed about accessing. I think about that ballroom often, the exact moment Julian Cross stood up and walked across that room toward me. I think about how quickly a room full of laughing strangers went completely silent once they understood the actual truth behind something they'd been mocking just moments earlier. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story today, it's this. Never let anyone's laughter convince you that what you're quietly building in the background doesn't matter. Sometimes the people closest to you simply lack the ability to recognize real value until someone else points directly toward it. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire story today. I genuinely love hearing your own thoughts down in the comments section below. Have you ever had someone underestimate what you were secretly building? What do you think the real lesson here actually is? Share your experience, because these comments genuinely mean the world to me. And if this story moved you even a little, please hit that subscribe button, because I've got so many more stories exactly like this one coming your way very soon.